My name's Beth, I'm 34 years old, and I live in United States. I'd say my life is pretty good. I have a stable career in marketing, a cozy home, and a husband, Liam, who's been my partner for the past 8 years. He's 36 and honestly one of the most easygoing people you'll ever meet. Liam has this calm energy that balances out my more, let's say, intense personality. If there's a problem, I'm the one who stresses over it, plans around it, and overanalyzes every angle, while Liam will shrug and say, "We'll figure it out." That's part of why I fell in love with him. He grounds me. But if I'm being honest, sometimes it feels like he's too relaxed. Whether it's deciding on dinner plans, managing finances, or making big life choices, it often feels like I'm carrying the weight. And I'd never say it out loud, but there are times I wonder if I'm more of a leader than a partner in our relationship. It's not a bad thing, but it can feel exhausting. Liam seems happy to follow my lead, and most of the time I'm okay with that. Still, I'd be lying if I said I didn't occasionally wish he'd take charge. Just once. That brings me to the Christmas party, just a week before the holidays. Liam's friend Alex was throwing his annual get-together, a tradition among their college group. Alex loves going all out, turning his house into a winter wonderland with lights, garland, and a towering Christmas tree that could belong in a Hallmark movie. Liam doesn't have a big social circle, so when he wanted to go, I made an effort, even though I didn't know most of the people there. That night, I even convinced Liam to wear matching Christmas sweaters with me, one of those cheesy red and green ones with reindeer. He wasn't thrilled, tugging at the neckline the whole drive there. "We're going to look ridiculous," he said. "That's the point," I replied, grinning. When we arrived, the driveway was packed with cars, and through the large windows, I could see people in ugly sweaters and Santa hats. The house was aglow with Christmas lights, making everything feel warm despite the freezing air outside. Inside, it smelled like cinnamon and pine, and Mariah Carey's "All I Want for Christmas Is You" played in the background. Alex greeted us at the door, wearing a sweater that actually blinked with LED lights. "Beth, Liam, glad you made it," Alex said, pulling Liam into a quick hug. "Good to see you too," Liam replied, smiling. Once inside, Liam drifted toward Alex and a group of guys near the bar, while I wandered into the kitchen to grab a drink. The kitchen was packed with people laughing over mugs of spiked cider and plates of Christmas cookies. I chatted with a woman wearing reindeer antlers, and we laughed at the guy in the corner whose sweater had a fireplace animation built in. Later, I found Liam standing near the Christmas tree, laughing at something Alex said. He looked so relaxed in that moment, completely at ease. "Having fun?" I asked, sliding up beside him. He smiled softly. "Yeah, it's nice to catch up with everyone." It felt like a perfect evening, or so I thought. The evening started off perfectly normal. I mingled with a few people I didn't know, sipping my wine and enjoying the festive atmosphere. Liam had gravitated toward Alex and a few of the guys, and they seemed to be having a good time catching up. Every so often, I'd glance over at him, and he'd smile back at me. It was a comfortable rhythm, one we'd fallen into at countless events over the years. A few hours in, a group of us found ourselves in the living room, sitting around in a loose circle. Someone suggested playing a game, a simple question and answer thing to keep the conversation flowing. Most of the questions were lighthearted and fun, like, "What's the worst gift you've ever received?" Or, "If you had to swap lives with a Christmas movie character, who would it be?" It was the kind of game that didn't require much effort, just enough to keep everyone laughing. As the game progressed, the questions got more personal, but in a playful way. "What's your partner's most annoying habit?" "What's the weirdest thing you've done for love?" People shared embarrassing stories and funny anecdotes about their relationships. It was during this game that someone asked, "How much do you trust your partner to have your back if things went sideways?" The question sparked a lively discussion. People joked about who would crumble under pressure, who would rise to the occasion. The mood was light, filled with laughter and teasing. I glanced at Liam, who was sitting next to me, quiet as usual. He had this way of being present without making himself the center of attention. His calmness was comforting most of the time, but in moments like this, it frustrated me. Why couldn't he jump in, add a joke, or say something? Before I could stop myself, I blurted out, "Oh, I know Liam wouldn't be able to protect me. I mean, look at him." The room erupted in laughter. I felt that little rush you get when you've said something funny when all eyes are on you. It was harmless, I thought. Just a lighthearted joke. Liam gave me a small, tight-lipped smile, but he didn't laugh. That should have been my first clue to stop, but I didn't. Emboldened by the reaction, I kept going. Seriously, I said, gesturing toward him. He doesn't even work out. If someone tried to mug us, we'd both be victims because he'd just freeze up. The laughter grew louder. Even Alex chuckled, chiming in with, "Liam, you've been skipping leg day, huh?" I could feel the energy in the room shift as everyone joined in, and for a moment I was the center of attention. It felt exhilarating, intoxicating almost. But Liam's expression didn't change. He wasn't laughing, just sitting there with that same awkward half smile. A part of me noticed it. The stiffness in his shoulders, the way he was gripping his beer bottle a little too tightly. But I ignored it. Instead, I pushed further. I pointed at his arms and said, "Look at these arms. They're like a sixth grader's. No offense, babe." That got the biggest laugh of the night. People were practically in tears, clutching their sides. Someone even slapped the coffee table, doubling over. But then, without a word, Liam stood up. He didn't say anything. No sarcastic comeback, no quiet plea for me to stop. He just grabbed his jacket and walked out of the room. For a second, I thought he was going to the bathroom or needed some air. But as the seconds stretched into minutes, it hit me. He wasn't coming back. He'd left. The laughter died down almost instantly, replaced by an awkward silence. People exchanged glances, unsure of what to say or do. Alex finally broke the tension. "You okay, Beth?" That was kind of harsh. Harsh? I replayed the scene in my head, my stomach twisting. It was just a joke. We'd teased each other before. How was this different? I forced a laugh, trying to shake off the awkwardness. "He's fine. Probably just tired or something." But inside, I felt a sharp sting of irritation. What was his problem? It's not like I'd said anything that wasn't true. And it's not like anyone there thought less of him because of it. If anything, I thought I'd made him look good, for being able to laugh at himself. The rest of the night was a blur. I stayed at the party a little longer, but it wasn't the same. The warmth and ease I'd felt earlier were gone, replaced by a gnawing mix of frustration and embarrassment. When I finally called an Uber and got home, the house was dark. Liam's car was in the driveway, but he didn't greet me when I walked in. I found him in bed, pretending to be asleep. I stood there for a moment, watching him. I wanted to shake him awake, demand to know why he'd left, why he was acting like this. But I didn't. I told myself he'd get over it by morning. He always did. But the next day, things were different. The next morning, I woke up to find Liam already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee in his hands. He didn't look up when I walked in. His shoulders were hunched, and he was scrolling through his phone in that distracted way people do when they're trying not to feel anything. I stood there for a moment, watching him. Something about the way he held himself felt different. Not the usual quiet Liam, but something colder, more distant. "Morning," I said, my voice deliberately light as I walked over to pour myself a cup of coffee. He didn't respond. I set my mug down a little harder than I meant to and crossed my arms. "Okay, are we seriously doing this? You're going to ignore me all morning?" He finally looked up, his expression unreadable. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in years, I couldn't tell what he was thinking. "You humiliated me in front of my friends," he said, his voice low but steady. The sharpness of his words caught me off guard. I blinked, trying to process what he'd just said. "What?" "It was a joke, Liam. Don't be so sensitive," I said, waving my hand dismissively. His jaw tightened. "It didn't feel like a joke. It felt like you were trying to make me look like a fool." I rolled my eyes, irritation bubbling to the surface. "Oh, come on. We tease each other all the time. It's not like I said anything that wasn't true." "That's the problem," he said, his voice quieter now but no less intense. "You didn't say anything that wasn't true. You just said it in front of everyone." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "So what? You're embarrassed because I made a few jokes about you not being the strongest guy in the room? That's what this is about?" His eyes flashed with something I couldn't quite place. Hurt, maybe, or anger. This isn't about me not being strong, Beth. This is about respect. You don't talk about your husband like that, especially not in front of other people. It's disrespectful. Disrespectful? I let out a short, incredulous laugh. Liam, you walked out. You left me there alone, and now you're trying to lecture me about respect? He shook his head, looking away. I needed to get out of there. You could have pulled me aside, I said, my voice rising. You could have told me you were upset instead of storming out and leaving me to deal with the awkwardness. I didn't want to make a scene, he said simply. Well, congratulations. You still managed to make it awkward for everyone, I snapped. Liam sighed, running a hand through his hair. You don't get it, do you? Get what? I shot back. You don't respect me, he said, his voice breaking just slightly. If you did, you wouldn't have kept going when you saw how uncomfortable I was. You wouldn't have done it in the first place. The words stung, but I refused to let him see that. I folded my arms tighter across my chest. Of course I respect you, Liam. Don't be ridiculous. Do you? He said, his voice louder now. He stood up, leaning on the table. Because it sure doesn't feel like it. You make the decisions. You call the shots. You joke about me like I'm some kind of accessory in your life. That's not respect, Beth. I could feel my face heating up. You're being dramatic. You're overthinking this. It was just a joke. Why are you blowing it out of proportion? Because it's not just a joke, he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The sound echoed in the quiet kitchen, and for a moment neither of us said anything. I'd never seen him like this. Liam never raised his voice, never lost his temper. Seeing him this way, his face flushed, his chest rising and falling with quick, shallow breaths, it unsettled me. I've spent years letting you take the lead, letting you make the decisions because I thought that's what you wanted. But this? He shook his head, his voice dropping to a near whisper. This is different. This is you showing everyone that you don't think I'm good enough, not strong enough, not man enough. Don't twist my words, I said, my voice shaky now. I don't have to, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. You've already said everything I needed to hear. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. I didn't know what to say. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely out of control. Why did you even marry me? Liam asked, his voice cracking slightly. Was it convenience? Because I was safe? Or was it something else? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. That's ridiculous, I said quickly, my voice rising. You're twisting this into something it's not. Am I? He challenged, his voice calm now, which somehow felt worse than when he was yelling. Because the way you treat me doesn't feel like love, Beth. It feels like I'm just here. Like I'm not enough for you. I froze, his words hanging heavy in the air between us. Liam, that's not true, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But even as I said it, a small, nagging voice in the back of my mind asked, Is it though? After our argument in the kitchen, Liam left the house. He didn't slam the door or shout any parting words. He simply walked out, his shoulders tense, his steps quick and deliberate. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, my chest tight with a mix of anger and something else. Something I didn't want to name. At first, I told myself he'd come back in an hour or two. Liam was like that. He needed space when things got heated. He'd go for a drive or spend some time with Alex, and when he returned, everything would feel a little less raw. But as the minutes stretched into hours, my confidence started to waver. I spent the rest of the day vacillating between frustration and guilt. Part of me was still indignant. He was blowing everything out of proportion. It was just a joke, wasn't it? But another part of me, a quieter, less defensive voice, whispered that maybe, just maybe, I'd gone too far. By the time evening rolled around, Liam still hadn't come home. His phone went straight to voicemail when I called, and my texts remained unread. I told myself he was probably with Alex or another friend, cooling off, but the gnawing unease in my stomach refused to let up. The house felt too big, too empty. Normally, I'd enjoy the quiet, relishing a rare moment to have the space to myself. But tonight, the silence was oppressive. I kept hearing Liam's voice in my head. Why did you marry me? Was it convenience? That question haunted me. I tried to distract myself, turning on the TV and scrolling aimlessly through shows I didn't actually want to watch. I even poured myself a glass of wine, hoping it would take the edge off, but it didn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Liam's face, his eyes filled with hurt, his voice breaking as he asked the question I couldn't answer. Was it convenience? I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. Of course it wasn't. I loved Liam. I'd always loved him. But as I sat there in the empty living room, my hands gripping the glass of wine a little too tightly, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd told him that. I couldn't remember the last time I'd shown him. The realization hit me like a slap. For years, I'd taken Liam for granted. His calm, steady presence had been a constant in my life, so much so that I'd stopped noticing it. He didn't demand attention or validation the way some people did. He just existed. And I'd let myself believe that was enough. But was it? "This is about respect," he'd said. The words echoed in my mind, sharp and unrelenting. Was he right? Had I stopped respecting him somewhere along the way? I sat there for hours, replaying the events of the past day over and over again. Every word I'd said, every laugh I'd elicited, felt sharper now, like daggers pointed inward. At the time, it had all seemed harmless, a joke, a moment of levity at Liam's expense. But now, with the silence pressing in around me, it felt cruel. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through old photos of us. There was one from our trip to the mountains last summer, Liam smiling awkwardly at the camera with a fishing pole in his hand. He'd never been an outdoorsy type, but he'd agreed to the trip because I'd wanted to go. If this story resonates with you, take a moment to reflect on the people in your life who matter most. And if you're finding value in this journey, consider liking this video and subscribing to support more heartfelt stories like this one. Your support means the world. That was the thing about Liam. He always put my needs first. He'd let me pick the movies, the restaurants, the vacation destinations. He'd deferred to me on every decision, big or small. And instead of appreciating it, I'd started to resent it. Why? The question gnawed at me. Was it because I wanted him to push back, to challenge me? Or was it because I didn't want to admit how much I needed him? I set the phone down and stared at the empty wine glass in my hand. My mind wandered to the question he'd asked earlier. Why did you marry me? The truth was, I didn't have a clear answer. I'd fallen for Liam because he was kind, steady, and dependable, the complete opposite of the chaotic, unpredictable relationships I'd had before him. He made me feel safe, like I didn't have to constantly look over my shoulder or brace for the next disaster. But had I ever truly loved him for who he was? Or had I loved him for what he represented? The thought made my stomach churn. Around midnight, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My heart leapt, and I jumped up from the couch, rushing to the window. But when I peeked outside, I realized it wasn't Liam. It was the neighbors coming home from a late-night outing. Disappointment settled over me like a heavy blanket. I went to bed that night feeling more alone than I had in years. The bed felt too big, too cold without Liam next to me. I'd never realized how much his presence anchored me until it wasn't there. The next morning, I woke up to find his side of the bed still empty. My first instinct was to call him again, but I stopped myself. What would I even say? I busied myself with chores, hoping the distraction would keep my mind off things, but it didn't work. Every time I folded a shirt or loaded a dish into the washer, I thought about Liam, how he'd always insist on helping, even though he hated doing laundry. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and drove to Alex's house, convinced that Liam would be there. Alex had always been his go-to when things got tough. When I pulled into Alex's driveway, my hands were trembling. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breath. Finally, I got out and rang the doorbell. Alex opened the door, his expression cautious. "Beth," he said, his voice neutral. "Is Liam here?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder before stepping outside and closing the door behind him. "He stayed here last night," Alex admitted, "but he left this morning." My heart sank. Did he say where he was going? Alex shook his head. He didn't say much, honestly, just that he needed some time. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Did he seem okay? He seemed hurt, Alex said bluntly. Look, Beth, I'm not trying to get in the middle of this, but what happened at the party? Liam wouldn't talk about it, but whatever it was, it really got to him. I bit my lip, my eyes stinging. I messed up, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I said some things I shouldn't have. Alex studied me for a moment, then sighed. He's a good guy, Beth. He doesn't deserve to feel like he's not enough. I know, I said, my voice breaking. I know. When I got back home from Alex's, the house felt even quieter than before. I hadn't gotten the answers I wanted, but Alex's words stayed with me. He doesn't deserve to feel like he's not enough. I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, replaying our argument in my head. I remembered the look on Liam's face when I'd pointed at him, the awkward smile he'd given me as the room erupted in laughter. How had I missed it? How had I not noticed the discomfort in his eyes? For years, I'd thought of myself as the strong one in our relationship. I made the decisions, handled the tough conversations, and kept everything running smoothly. Liam, with his quiet demeanor and easygoing nature, had always been content to follow my lead. Or so I'd thought. Now, for the first time, I wondered if I'd been wrong. Maybe Liam hadn't been content. Maybe he'd just been too kind to push back. The next few days passed in a blur. I went to work, did my usual tasks, but everything felt hollow. I found myself glancing at my phone constantly, hoping for a message from Liam, but there was nothing. Every night I went to bed hoping he'd come home, and every morning I woke up to the same empty bed. The ache in my chest grew heavier with each passing day. On the fourth day, I decided to call his sister, Emily. She and Liam were close, and if anyone knew where he was, it would be her. Beth? Emily's voice was cautious when she answered. Hi, Emily, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was wondering if you've heard from Liam. There was a pause on the other end. He's staying with me, she said finally. Relief flooded through me, but it was quickly replaced by a knot of anxiety. Can I talk to him? Emily hesitated. He's not ready to talk yet. Beth, he's really upset. I know, I said, my voice breaking. I messed up, Emily. I didn't mean to hurt him, but I did. I need to make things right. Give him time, she said gently. He needs to figure out what he wants. The weight of her words hit me hard. What he wants. The implication was clear. Liam was questioning whether he wanted to come back. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. My mind kept drifting back to the early days of our relationship, when everything had felt so easy. Liam had been my rock, my constant. I'd never doubted his love for me, never doubted that he'd always be there. But had I ever given him the same certainty? A week after Liam left, I finally heard from him. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation or a heated confrontation. It was a simple text. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. My hands trembled as I typed, of course, just let me know when. We agreed to meet at a small cafe not far from our house, one we'd visited countless times over the years. I arrived early, too anxious to sit at home, and spent the time stirring my coffee until it was cold. My mind raced with everything I wanted to say, but I knew none of it would matter unless I truly listened. When Liam walked in, I barely recognized him. It wasn't his clothes or his posture, it was something in his eyes. There was a quiet confidence about him that hadn't been there before. For a moment, I felt a pang of fear. What if this was goodbye? Hi, he said, sitting down across from me. Hi, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. The silence between us was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Liam glanced out the window as if gathering his thoughts, and I waited, not daring to rush him. Finally, I took a deep breath and broke the silence. I'm sorry, I said, my voice trembling. For everything. For the jokes, for not listening, for not seeing you. I've been selfish, Liam, and you didn't deserve that. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said finally, about us, about what I want. And? I asked, my heart pounding. I want to try, he said. But things have to change, Beth. I can't go back to the way things were. I need to feel like an equal in this relationship. I need to feel respected. Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded. You're right. You deserve that. And I want to do better, Liam. I really do. He nodded, his expression softening. It's not going to be easy, he said. We've both got work to do. I know, I said, but I'm willing to try if you are. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Later that evening, as we sat together on the couch, the silence between us felt different. Less like a wall and more like a bridge. I reached for his hand, and to my relief, he didn't pull away. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't understood before. Love wasn't just about grand gestures or romantic words. It was about seeing each other, truly seeing each other, even when it wasn't easy. I didn't know what the future held for us, but for the first time in a long time, I was willing to face it together.